Hello everybody and welcome to Learn Penang Hokkien. Today I decided to do another history video to cover one more aspect of Chinese history. But before I begin, I want to say this: in this world where we are filled with great trade tensions, it is an apt reminder that those who do not learn from history are condemned to repeat it. And in our world today, we are at the risk of repeating history. Now, this history which I'm going to share with you today is with regards to the First Opium War, which happened in China, and that began China's century of humiliation. Let's go through how this war gets started and what is the outcome of the war, and I will share with you chapter by chapter. The First Opium War was a major conflict between China and Britain that took place from 1839 to 1842. It started mainly because of disagreement over trade, especially the illegal trade of opium. Britain was selling opium to Chinese people even though it was banned in China. The Chinese government tried to stop the trade, but Britain refused. Tensions grew and eventually fighting broke out. This war marked the beginning of a difficult period in Chinese history. It showed how much stronger the British military had become, especially their powerful navy. China, still using older weapons and tactics, was not ready for a war with a modern European power. Many people see the First Opium War as the start of what's called the century of humiliation for China, a time when foreign countries had a lot of control over Chinese trade, land, and laws. This war wasn't just about opium. It was also about power, respect, and control. Britain wanted better trade deals and more rights for its citizens in China. China wanted to protect its people and keep control of its own country. These two goals clashed, and the result was war. In the 1700s and early 1800s, Britain was becoming one of the world's most powerful countries. British people had developed a strong taste for Chinese goods, especially tea, which had become a daily habit in British homes. They also loved fine silk fabrics and beautiful porcelain dishes made in China. These products were highly valued and the British were willing to pay a lot for them. But there was a problem. China didn't want much from Britain in return. The Chinese believed their country already had everything it needed. They saw foreign products as unnecessary or even low quality. Because of this, Chinese merchants mostly asked to be paid in silver. This created a big trade imbalance. Silver was flowing out of Britain and into China, and the British economy was starting to feel the loss. British leaders and merchants became frustrated. They wanted to sell something to China that would make the trade more equal, but they had trouble finding a product that Chinese people would buy in large amounts. Eventually, the British found a solution, but it was a harmful one: opium. They believed selling opium could fix the trade imbalance, but it would lead to serious consequences for both countries. When the British realized that China didn't want to buy their goods, they looked for something that Chinese people would become dependent on. That's when they turned to opium, a highly addictive drug made from poppy plants. The British grew opium in India, which they controlled at the time, and then smuggled it into China. Even though selling opium was illegal in China, British and other Western traders continued to sell it secretly. They used ships to deliver the opium to Chinese ports like Guangzhou, where Chinese smugglers helped to bring it into the country. At first, only a few people used it, but over time, millions of Chinese became addicted. Opium affected people's health, made them unable to work, and even caused families to break apart. Chinese officials and scholars saw the growing addiction as a national crisis. They believed the opium trade was weakening the country both physically and morally. The British, however, were making huge profits from selling opium. For them, it was a successful way to balance trade. But for China, it was a disaster. The growing tension over the opium trade would soon lead to conflict and eventually to war. In the early 1800s, Guangzhou, also called Canton, was the only Chinese port where foreign merchants were allowed to trade. The Chinese government had very strict rules. Foreigners could not live freely in China or travel beyond the trading area. They could only stay in special buildings called factories, which are not actually factories but trading posts, and only for a few months each year. Foreign traders, especially the British, felt frustrated. They didn't like being limited by Chinese rules. They also weren't allowed to speak directly to Chinese officials. Instead, they had to go through local merchants who acted as go-betweens. This made communication difficult and often led to misunderstandings. The British believed in free trade, which meant they thought they should be able to sell and buy goods without interference. But China wanted to keep strict control over all foreign influence. The two sides had very different views about how trade should work. As British demand for better treatment grew, tensions increased in Guangzhou. The city became the center of the opium trade and the growing conflict. This made it one of the key places where the problems between Britain and China started turning into open conflict. In 1834, the British sent Lord William Napier to China to improve trade relations. Britain had just ended the East India Company's monopoly on trade with China, and now the British government wanted to deal directly with Chinese officials. Lord Napier was sent to Guangzhou to open up better communication and expand trade. However, things didn't go well. Lord Napier didn't follow Chinese customs. He tried to send letters directly to local Chinese officials, which was against the rules. In China, foreign representatives were supposed to follow a special system of communication called the tributary system, which showed respect to the emperor. But Napier refused to do this, believing Britain was equal to China, not lower. The Chinese were offended and refused to meet him. When Napier tried to force the issue, Chinese forces blocked his path and became stuck in Guangzhou. Eventually, he became sick and was forced to leave. He died shortly afterward. The Napier affair made things worse between Britain and China. It showed that both sides had very different ideas about diplomacy, respect, and power. It also proved that future interactions would not be easy and that war might not be far off. By the late 1830s, the opium problem in China had become severe. Millions of people were addicted and the Chinese economy was suffering. Silver was flowing out of the country to pay for opium, which weakened the economy even more. The emperor decided something had to be done. In 1839, the emperor sent a strong and respected official, Lin Zexi, to stop the opium trade once and for all. Lin arrived in Guangzhou, the center of the opium trade, and immediately took action. He ordered all foreign merchants to hand over their opium. When they refused at first, he blockaded their factories until they gave in. Lin ended up confiscating and destroying more than 20,000 shares of opium. He mixed the opium with lime and salt water and dumped it into the sea. This act was meant to show how serious China was about stopping the opium trade. Britain saw this as a huge insult and an attack on their property and trade rights. They demanded payment for the destroyed opium and wanted China to promise not to interfere again. When China refused, Britain prepared to war. Lin Zex's actions were brave, but they also helped start the First Opium War. Tensions finally exploded into violence in September 1839 near Kowloon, across the water from Hong Kong. A British ship tried to buy supplies, but Chinese soldiers fired on it. The British responded with their warships, using powerful cannons to attack the Chinese forts. This small battle or skirmish didn't last long, but it showed that fighting had begun. The British had modern ships with strong weapons, while the Chinese still used older cannons and defenses. The difference in technology was clear. After the skirmish, the British demanded safety for their ships and traders, but Chinese officials refused to give in. Both sides believed they were right and neither wanted to back down. This fight at Kowloon is often seen as the first military action of the First Opium War. It marked the moment when words and negotiations gave way to violence. It was also a warning that more serious battles were coming. Even though it was a small clash, it opened the door to a much larger conflict that would stretch across China's coast and deep into the country. The Battle of Chuenpi was the first major battles of the First Opium War. It took place in January 1841 near the entrance of the Pearl River, close to Guangzhou Canton. This battle showed how serious the conflict had become and how much stronger the British Navy was compared to China's defenses. The British wanted to force China to agree to their demands, such as fair trade, the right to speak directly with Chinese officials, and protection for British merchants. When talks failed, they used their powerful warships to attack Chinese forts near the town of Chuenpi. The British Navy had advanced ships and heavy cannons. In contrast, the Chinese forts used older weapons and couldn't match British firepower. The battle was short but one-sided. The British easily defeated the Chinese defenses and captured key positions. After the battle, the British and a Chinese official, Qishan, tried to negotiate peace. They made a temporary agreement called the Convention of Chuenpi, which included handing over Hong Kong to Britain. But when the Chinese emperor heard about the deal, he rejected it. The battle proved that Britain could not be easily stopped and that more fighting was on the way. Back in Britain, people had mixed feelings about the situation in China. Some people, especially merchants and politicians, supported the war. They believed China was being unfair by refusing to trade equally with Britain. They also felt that Britain had the right to protect its citizens and businesses, even if it meant using military force. But not everyone agreed. Others were shocked that Britain was going to war over a drug trade. Many people thought it was wrong to sell opium, especially since it was causing so much damage in China. Some members of parliament gave powerful speeches against the war, calling it immoral and driven only by greed. Still, the British government moved forward. They sent more warships and troops to China, hoping to force the Chinese to open their markets. Newspapers in Britain often portrayed the Chinese as backward and unreasonable, while painting British actions as justified. In the end, even though there was some protest, the war continued with full government support. This was a time when powerful countries like Britain believed they had the right to use force to expand their influence and protect their economic interests around the world. The First Opium War officially began in 1839 when talks between China and Britain broke down. Britain wanted to protect its trade, especially the opium business, and to force China to open up to more foreign influence. China, on the other hand, wanted to stop the harmful opium trade and keep control over its ports and people. Britain used its powerful navy to block Chinese ports and stop Chinese trade ships. British warships began moving along China's southern coastline, attacking important positions. The goal was to pressure the Qing government by disrupting trade and damaging China's economy. At first, China tried to resist, but their ships and weapons were no match for Britain's modern cannons and steam-powered ships. The Chinese army was brave but poorly trained and lacked the advanced technology the British had. These early attacks showed the weakness of the Qing military. China was facing not just a foreign enemy, but also a huge challenge in trying to protect a massive coastline with outdated weapons. The early victories gave Britain confidence, while China was left scrambling to figure out how to respond to this kind of war, fought with modern firepower and global pressure. In 1841, Britain launched a stronger military campaign against China. This phase of the war is known as the British Offensive, where British forces became more aggressive and began to capture Chinese territory. They no longer just wanted to punish China, they wanted to force major changes in Chinese trade policy. British warships moved quickly and attacked key locations along the coast. They used their advanced navy and well-trained soldiers to overpower Chinese defenses. One major victory came when the British captured Hong Kong Island, which would later become a permanent British colony. They used it as a base for further attacks. At this point, British goals became clearer. They wanted to open more Chinese ports to trade, protect British merchants, and make sure British citizens in China were treated under British, not Chinese law. The Qing government was shocked at how quickly British forces were advancing. Local Chinese officials often tried to negotiate or surrender to avoid destruction. But Britain kept pushing forward. The offensive showed that the British weren't just looking for revenge, they were looking to change the way China dealt with the outside world, using military power to force China into a new kind of relationship. The Pearl River Campaign was an important part of the war that took place near Guangzhou, one of the most important trading cities in southern China. The Pearl River is a major waterway that connects Guangzhou to the sea, so whoever controlled the river could control trade and transportation in the area. British warships sailed up the river, attacking Chinese forts and defenses along the way. The Chinese army tried to stop them, but their weapons and ships were outmatched. The British used powerful cannons and steam-powered ships to win battle after battle. The fighting caused panic in Guangzhou. The city's leaders didn't want to see their homes and businesses destroyed, so they tried to make deals with the British. At one point, a local truce was made, and the British accepted a payment of money to stop attacking temporarily. But this peace did not last. The British were not just interested in money, they wanted long-term changes to trade laws and legal protections for their citizens. So the campaign continued, and the British used their victories to gain more control over the region. The Pearl River campaign proved that Britain could move deep into Chinese territory and that China had no clear plan to stop them. After their success in southern China, the British decided to move further inland. In 1842, they launched a campaign into central China, heading north along the coast and deeper into the country. This was a turning point in the war because the British wanted to show that they could strike anywhere, not just in southern ports. One of the most important battles took place in the city of Zhenjiang, located at the meeting point of the Yangtze River and the Grand Canal, two of China's most important transportation routes. The British knew that controlling these rivers would give them power over trade and food supplies. The Chinese defenders fought hard, but once again, British weapons and tactics proved far stronger. After a fierce battle, Zhenjiang fell. This caused a major crisis for the Qing Dynasty, as now the road to the capital city, Nanking, was opened. The Qing government realized they could no longer protect their heartland. Their military couldn't stop the British from moving further north. The loss of Zhenjiang forced Chinese leaders to consider ending the war before things got even worse. The Yangtze campaign was the British military's final push during the First Opium War. The Yangtze River is one of the longest and most important rivers in China, and it runs through many key cities. By moving up this river, British forces could cut off Chinese trade, food supplies, and communication between regions. As British ships sailed up the Yangtze, they faced little resistance. Chinese cities and towns along the river were not prepared to defend against modern warships. In July 1842, the British captured Zhenjiang, the city close to the capital region. This was a massive blow to the Qing government. Now the British were in a position to attack Nanking, one of the empire's most important cities. With the threat of Nanking falling, Qing officials became desperate to end the fighting. They realized that continuing the war would only lead to more losses and possibly even the invasion of the capital. The Yangtze campaign showed just how far behind China's military had fallen compared to Britain's. It also made it clear that China would have to agree to British demands. Peace talks soon began in Nanking, where both sides would come together to sign a treaty that ended the war. The war finally ended in August 1842 with the signing of the Treaty of Nanking aboard a British warship near the city of Nanking. This treaty marked the end of the First Opium War, but it came with serious consequences for China. According to the treaty, China had to give Hong Kong Island to Britain. China had to pay a large amount of silver to cover Britain's war costs. 5 Chinese ports were opened to British trade: Guangzhou, Xiamen, Fuzhou, Ningbo, and Shanghai. British citizens in China were given special legal rights and could not be punished under Chinese law. The treaty was called unequal because China was forced to accept all the terms without negotiation. It gave Britain more power and influence in China, while the Qing government lost control over parts of its economy and territory. Many Chinese people were angry and ashamed. The treaty showed that foreign powers could force China to make deals at gunpoint. It was the beginning of a difficult time in Chinese history, where outside countries could continue to take advantage of a weakened China. The First Opium War was not just about opium. It was about trade, power, and control. Britain wanted China to open its market and allow free trade, especially for opium, which was making British merchants rich. China wanted to protect its people and its traditions, but it lacked the military strength to stop the British invasion. The war showed how the balance of power had changed. The British had modern ships, powerful cannons, trained soldiers, while the Qing Dynasty still used older weapons and tactics. The war was a warning to China that it would need to modernize if it wanted to defend itself in the future. The Treaty of Nanking gave Britain major advantages and marked the start of what many called the century of humiliation in China. Over the next 100 years, other Western countries and even Japan would force China into more unequal treaties. Although the war ended, its effect lasted a long time. It changed China's relationship with the world and was the first step towards big changes in Chinese history, politics, and even revolution. The First Opium War is a powerful reminder of what happens when nations collide over greed, trade, and pride.